On Tuesday, armed militants in Pakistan's Balochistan province hijacked a train and took more than 200 passengers hostage. The train, known as the Jafar Express, was travelling from Quetta to Peshawar, and it was hijacked after the militant, who claimed to be part of the Baloch Liberation Army, a separatist group pushing for an independent Balochistan, blew up the tracks inside a tunnel, forcing the train to a halt. The train originally had more than 400 passengers on board, but in a statement, the BLA said that, after a shootout where at least 30 Pakistani security personnel were killed, they'd released roughly 200 civilians on board, and the remaining 200 or so hostages were all Pakistani security personnel, whom the BLA described as prisoners of war. A few hours later, the BLA offered a prisoner exchange and said the Pakistani state had 48 hours to release Baloch political prisoners, or all of the hostages would be killed. But Pakistan's Interior Minister responded by saying that the militants, quote, don't deserve any concessions. And on Wednesday, Pakistan security forces attempted a rescue mission, which ended with at least 21 hostages and 33 militants dead. This is probably the worst incident of Baloch separatist violence since at least 2018, and the movement has been gathering momentum in the past few years, largely because Pakistan's security forces have their hands full dealing with the Taliban and the Pakistani Taliban operating out of Afghanistan. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at the history of Baloch separatism, why tensions are escalating, and what might happen next. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's start with a bit of context. The Baloch people are an ethnic group native to a region known as Balochistan, which spans parts of southwestern Pakistan, southeastern Iran and southern Afghanistan. Baloch separatists generally imagine a Baloch state spanning all three countries, but most Baloch separatist violence has been concentrated in Pakistan, both because that's where most of this hypothetical Baloch state would be, and because the Baloch people have a testy history with the Pakistani government. When British India was partitioned and Pakistan became independent in the late 1940s, Balochistan decided to join the nascent Pakistani state. However, relations between Baloch nationalists and the Pakistani government have been tense ever since, with at least 3 distinct waves of insurgency and conflict. The first wave came in the late 50s, when the Pakistani state tried to centralise power via the so-called one-unit scheme in 1955. The scheme was mainly a response to escalating separatist sentiment in today's Bangladesh, but it also reduced Baloch representation at the federal level and forestalled the establishment of a devolved Baloch assembly, triggering an insurgency campaign by Baloch nationalists demanding greater autonomy. The Pakistani state responded with an aggressive crackdown, and it was mostly squashed by the late 50s. The second wave came in the 1970s. In 1972, the Pakistani government finally allowed Balochistan to hold provincial elections, which were won by the main opposition party, the National Awami Party, who advocated for greater provincial autonomy. The central government didn't like this result, and in 1973 they accused the provincial government of conspiring with foreign powers, dissolved it, and imposed martial law. Unsurprisingly, this didn't go down well with Baloch nationalists, who'd waited 25 years for a provincial government only to have it dissolved a year later, and another wave of nationalist insurgency broke out. This was a particularly bloody period, because both the Pakistani military became more anxious about separatist sentiment after Bangladesh seceded from Pakistan in 1971, and because there was a widespread sense amongst ordinary Balochs that the region was being deprived of its mineral wealth. For context, largely due to its low population density and lack of fertile land, Balochistan has always been one of the poorest regions in South Asia, but it has pretty large oil and gas reserves. This became a particularly contentious topic in the 70s, both because oil prices rose steeply after the 1973 oil embargo, and because the 1973 constitution made it so that most oil and gas revenues went to the federal government. An uneasy peace developed in the 80s, but a third wave of violence kicked off in the 2000s, largely because the US war in Afghanistan destabilised the entire region and stoked fears in Balochistan that the subsequent influx of Pashtun refugees would further marginalise the Baloch people in their own province. Tensions escalated in 2006 after the assassination of Baloch tribal leader Akbar Bugti, and this was when the Baloch Liberation Army emerged as the preeminent Baloch Separatist group. Unlike previous Baloch Separatist outfits, which generally pushed for greater autonomy rather than outright independence, the BLA want to create an entirely new Balochistan state, although we should say it's not clear this is a popular project. Gallup polling conducted in 2012 found that, while the vast majority wanted greater autonomy in Balochistan, only 37% of Balochs were in favour of independence, and a leaked diplomatic cable from the US Embassy in 2006 stated that there seems to be little support in the province for the current insurgency. Anyway, this insurgency continued at varying degrees of intensity over the next 15 years or so, but things have really escalated recently. This is in part because successive political and economic crises in Pakistan have stoked separatist sentiment in Balochistan, but it's mainly because of the Taliban. Pakistan apparently hoped that, in exchange for the tacit support that Pakistan provided during the US occupation, the Taliban would help Pakistan deal with regional terror groups, most notably the Pakistani Taliban or TTP. Unfortunately, the Taliban had different ideas, and have actually allowed the TTP to use Afghanistan as an operating base for their attacks in Pakistan, which have escalated dramatically in recent years. This has meant that Pakistan security forces have their hands full dealing with the TTP, which has created the space for a surge in attacks by the BLA. The numbers are pretty terrifying. According to analysis by the Pakistan Institute for Peace Studies, between 2020 and 2024, the number of terror attacks and terror-related fatalities essentially quadrupled, with most of these attacks being carried out by either the TTP, the BLA, or ISIS-Khorasan. The 70% increase in attacks between 2023 and 2024 was the largest since at least 2009, with the steepest uptick coming in, you guessed it, Balochistan, where there was an 84% year-on-year increase. Worryingly, there have already been around 140 terror attacks in the first 2 months of 2025, 60% up on last year's 2-month average, and this was before the train hijacking, which looks likely to be the deadliest terror attack in recent history. So, what happens next? Well, unfortunately, it's hard to see things getting better anytime soon. Pakistan security services are clearly overstretched, which means a military solution isn't forthcoming, and it's hard to see a political solution either, especially after this week's train hijacking. Nonetheless, in the medium or long term, history suggests that security crackdowns are only temporary solutions, which is why this problem keeps recurring. And a lasting peace will require either the Pakistani state to either cede some political autonomy or make sure Balochistan enjoys at least some economic growth. After all, Balochistan is still the country's poorest region by quite some distance. Like a lot of things, this whole situation is very much in a state of flux. With Trump breaking international alliances and fundamentally changing geopolitics, the world has certainly felt more stable. Every day we're faced with weird headlines from Trump's trade war with Canada and Mexico, and Elon's not quite so efficient Department of Government efficiency, or Trump declaring war on Mars to try and regain some international allies. Okay, that one might not be real, but we do dive deep into the chaotic world of US politics in our series WTF USA. That's our series where we explain everything that's happened in the land of the free. With Trump behind the Resolute desk, the number of WTF moments only looks likely to increase. Unlike some of our other series videos, the tone of WTF USA is more light-hearted and takes something of an irreverent look at what's going on. If you're interested, WTF USA can be found exclusively on Nebula. Nebula is also the home to other incredible original content from your favourite creators, like Real Life Law's series War Room. Given how much conflict and geopolitics there is going on right now, the show attempts to get you up to speed every month, explaining what's been going on and helping you stay informed with the latest from geopolitics. If you didn't know, Nebula is an independent creator-owned streaming platform that specialises in thoughtful content, from creators like Wendover Productions, Neo and Real Life Law. It's not just WTF USA either. You can also watch every normal TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in some instances before they even land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, click our link in the description to get 40% off. We really hope you check out the series, and as always, thanks for your support.